Hey guys, welcome to BP, the Bible Perspective. Atheists aren't trying to destroy God, just God in you. Now, before we unpack this, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. I want to unpack a video that I came across on YouTube called Why the God of the Bible is Evil. And it was put out by Planet Curious, the YouTube channel. And it strung together several clips of these very famous atheists. Dan Barker, Michael Shermer, Christopher Hitchens, Lawrence Krauss. I want to unpack some of the reasonings they have for accusing God of being evil. Okay, now I think we as Christians should not be afraid when we are challenged by men like this. Let me also say this, and I'm going to acknowledge that these men are on a much higher intellectual level than I am. But I always say when I'm confronted with why would I dare to challenge renowned men like this, intellectuals? Because I listen to them, and because I have a brain, and because I can think. And while I'm not as educated as they are, I do listen to their reasoning, and I can reason. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to respond to these clips, okay, that atheists make. Now, atheism is on the rise. Or I should say, it seemed like it's on the rise. That there are a lot of people now, there's a movement called deconstructing, or deconstructing from God, deconstructing from Christianity. And it seemed to be sort of a movement. Now, when these group of atheists here are not a part of the deconstructing movement. However, when you listen to some of their reasoning, some of their arguments, they seem to be pretty common, pretty typical. Some of the accusation that they're going to accuse God of and label him as being evil, okay? But I'm going to let them speak. Let's go to the first clip.
Look, if you have a guy that doesn't believe in God, then the best he can do is whatever feels the best to him, that's what he needs to do. So that means that if the atheistic communist of the Nazi Germans. Now, Dan understands the...
I wanted you to capture his expression here. And I'm gonna play the clip next to it that he's just gonna let this guy step in it. But I want you to see his expression. It's almost like he's kind of loading the gun as he listens here.
Perfectly. In fact, let me tell you how well Dan understands this.
You stuck your foot in it this time, I'm sorry. By saying that Hitler was an atheistic communist, did you actually say that? You did say that. He's on the record. Hitler was not a communist. Hitler was a Nazi, a National Socialist. Hitler believed in a God. He was not atheistic. He talked about the Creator all the time. He was a creationist. He credited Jesus as the inspiration for him exterminating the Jews. They wore God mit uns, God is with us, on their belt buckles. Those Nazis were Lutherans and Catholics. Hitler was a member of the Catholic Church, never excommunicated. He credited Jesus. He was a really lousy Christian, I have to admit. He was a really weird Christian, but he was not an atheist. So correct yourself, Lyle. Hitler was not an atheist, and he was not a communist. Do a little bit of history there. That's true.
That is what you would call a mic drop. And I only played this clip kind of because it was humorous, but it also shows sometimes that Christians, he did step in it. He didn't have his facts, and then he challenged the man who brought his receipts. All right, but let's go to the next clip. Now, I say that too because a lot of Christians in their apologetics, I'll say this just as a kind of a takeaway lesson for Christians. Your apologetics really only work among other fellow Christians, not among people who don't agree with you. And certainly those who would come with better facts. So that could be a lesson learned. All right.
Would never argue that I can prove definitively that there's no purpose to the universe. I see no evidence of purpose, and that governs my life, but I would rather describe myself as my late friend Christopher Hitchens described himself as an anti-theist.
Now, let me just say this. He said that he doesn't see any purpose for the universe, and thus he governs his life according to that principle. Does he really? No purpose? There's absolutely, when you look at the universe, you cannot see the purpose of the universe. I challenge that. As ignorant as I am, I can look and say, there's the sun, the stars, the moon. What's the purpose of the sun? Well, the purpose of the sun is to give heat to the earth. What's the purpose of the earth? To give life. Right? That's the purpose of the earth, to give life. What is the purpose of orbiting the earth? And as a scientist, he would even kind of know that there is a synchronous kind of condition with the universe, that one kind of affects the other. The orbit of our galaxy affects the orbit of the sun, which affects the orbit of the moon. All of these things exist together. Now, I'm going to stop there because I'm going to really get out of my element. But when he says he sees no purpose in the universe, I find that very, very interesting.
I would not argue that there's not a God. I just certainly wouldn't want to live in a universe with one. I wouldn't want to live in a universe with a cosmic Saddam Hussein who would condemn me to eternal fire or turn me into a pillar of salt because I look back.
But you live in a world with a Saddam Hussein. You live in a world with a lot of Saddam Husseins. So even if you want to say that God doesn't exist, you still have Saddam Hussein. So what is the difference here? Now, I'll tell you the difference. You live in conditions that you can surround yourself. You can afford to surround your environment. You can afford to not go certain places. But to you, if God doesn't exist, how do you explain the Saddam Husseins? How do you explain the evil dictators from throughout history and present around the world?
Who would take the dignity of being a human being away from me? As my friend Steven Weinberg, a Nobel Prize winning physicist.
Let me question that. How has God taken the dignity away from you? In other words, let's just say from my perspective as a Christian, I certainly say God exists. So let's just go with that premise, since you are attacking God. Now, one, you don't believe in the existence of God, right? So whoever takes your dignity away, whether it's through crime, whether it's through fraud, right? You can't blame God because you don't believe that God exists. But let's just go with your argument, since you are arguing against a God that I believe exists. How has God infringed on your how has God infringed on you? In other words, from my perspective, God allows you to be an atheist. He allows you to be an atheist.
That said that religion is an assault on human dignity. And I happen to think so. I happen to agree with that fact.
I would say some religions, and then I would say more how people administer certain religions, especially when it comes to Christianity.
Because the claim that we cannot determine the meaning of our lives and how we can act, that we are told how to act by someone who is so insecure that if we act differently, they won't condemn us to their prison for a few years, but to hell for an eternity. And I'm often told, if we give away our belief in God, how can we have morality?
I'll come back to that in a moment. Let's ask this question here when he says that God dictates to you, right? But does he not allow you not to believe in him? Does he allow you to, when you say that God is insecure, that he would condemn you to hell, well, give context. So let's step back for a moment and go back to your example of Saddam Hussein. Now, since I don't know this particular man, I can't ask him. I can only just kind of throw out the question. Would you allow Saddam Hussein to live, knowing the horrors he's committed? Would you put him to death? Would you confine him to prison? Okay. How about criminals today? How about serial killers? You know, people that's involved in the sex trafficking, the sex trade. Would you put them in prison? How about people that kidnap little children? We saw one of the horrifying news stories today about a little girl that was believed to be kidnapped. She was just simply riding her bike. She was living her life, just simply riding her bike. It appears that someone snatched her away. Now, if you catch that person, would you put them in prison? Now, remember, if you do so, then why would you aren't you acting like God? Would you say that person deserves to go to prison, needs to be removed from society because of his actions? Now, if you say yes, then you're acting like God, because when it's not just that God was so insecure as you snarkily accuse him of, and that's fine. You can insult, okay. But by the way, and God's not moved by the insult either. You know, I'm often, people. I kind of chuckle when people think, like, for example, you go back to the story of the Titanic, and there was a statement that was uttered where one person said that not even God himself could sink the Titanic. The Titanic was believed to be one of the most advanced ship of the time. Now, and some people think that God sunk the Titanic because of that statement alone. Well, first of all, God doesn't have to be that petty. And secondly, I can imagine God looking down at the Titanic as it is steaming towards the iceberg, saying, "Look at these fools." In other words, God didn't have to sink the Titanic. Man's foolishness did. So no, God is not going to respond to your insults. And that's fine that you want to insult him, but he's not going to respond to your insult because, again, what is your life? How long is your life? All right? But so the fact that God then confines you because you violate his principle. Now, remember, you don't believe that God exists. I do. So why would God allow you to live in his environment, in his creation, when you fail his criteria? Now, if you're going to ask a question about morality, and let's listen to what he said, and I'm going to certainly respond to this.
I was on a radio program in the United States recently where someone said, well, if this is true and the meaning of our lives is just established by the meaning we make and the value we give to each other and the rationality we hold that some way that maximum human happiness is a good thing without being told by God, but if I get rid of the God, then what stops me from murdering my neighbor? Well, if any of you stopped believing in God, I would ask you, would you go out tomorrow and murder your neighbor? Well, some of you say yes. And for those people...
Well, the problem with your statement is, would you go out and murder someone? Well, if you had the power. See, right now you live in a paradigm of law, and the law governs your actions. So for the most part, you won't kill because the law says thou shalt not kill. You don't steal because the law says you shall not steal. Don't bear false witness because the law says don't bear false witness. But what if you was like Saddam Hussein? What if you had absolute power? We look at police officers who had qualified immunity, and with their immunity, they know they can get away with shooting someone, killing someone, and they do. What if you had no restrictions? No restrictions. You had absolute power. So now, would you kill someone? And it's interesting because remember, with the laws, people are still doing those things. All the commandments they're breaking, even with the laws. And I'm talking about the law, the commandments. Forget the commandments. How about this, the simple law of the land? And with the laws of the land, people are still violating them. Road rage, speeding, stealing, all of these things with the law of the land. So if you had no law, how would you act? Of course, we can't test that now because we have the law. And I believe God is the one who gave us the law, gave us the principles of the law. That man didn't just sit down and decide, you know what? We're killing each other. Let's do better. No. I haven't seen that tested yet.
As the subtitle of my book, that I think religion poisons everything. I'm not just doing what publishers like and coming up with a provocative subtitle. I mean to say it infects us in our most basic integrity. It says we can't be moral without Big Brother, without a totalitarian permission. It means.
So I would say prove or demonstrate where without the existence of God, and I'm going to say Christianity, okay, the Christianity, where without that has mankind acted right? Where have they done right? Show me the atheist utopia where you could point to and say, look, here is a community of atheists, a city of atheists, a county of atheists. Here's an example of our morality without God, our actions without God.
We can't be good to one another. It means we can't think without this. We must be afraid. We must also be forced to love someone who we fear. The essence.
Who are you forced to love that you fear? Now, I believe he's referring to certain language in Scripture. Okay, we're talking about the fear of the Lord. I would counter that by saying if you get to know God, you don't fear him. If you get to know God, you know that he is, I would say he is loving. That you will say, I love him with the promises that he's promised us with.
Of sadomasochism, the essence of abjection, the essence of the master-slave relationship, and that knows that death is coming and can't wait to bring it on. I say this is evil. And though I do some nights stay home, I enjoy more the nights when I go out and fight against this ultimate wickedness and ultimate stupidity.
If there
Okay, let's go to this next clip here. Again, I think with the last clip here with Christopher Hitchens, and I'm gonna say the late Christopher Hitchens, and if we can for sure now probably knows whether or not if God is true. In other words, I think he could probably prove that if he was able to speak from the grave. That's not a slight, because we all right now live between birth and death. He has already died. We all live between birth and life. And let me just say, for the record, that my belief is one of just that. It is a belief, it is a faith. Not a science, but a faith. I would also say that science have never disproved the claims of the Bible. It might have disproved the claims of religion or religious people, but not the Bible. And I would further say, what is the Bible told? We can't ask Christopher Hitchens now, because I said he's already made his transition. But all of the other atheists, what has God told you to do that was wrong? See, they're cherry picking certain aspects of the Bible that they don't have answers for, and that the Bible probably didn't give answers for. But as far as what he has told you personally to do, what has he told you to do that was wrong?
And if the atheists get to the end of their life and discover, yep, I was wrong, there is a God. This is counterfactual. This is not that I actually believe it. Then you are right. I would then believe and know that there's a God, but that does not mean I would respect or admire a God who would create something like a hell to send someone like me to, and my beloved mother.
Now, before he's going to give a list of people, but notice he said he cannot, if he was to come in contact with God, the fallacy of that is if you was to come in contact with God, God being the optimum word here. In other words, if you came in contact with God, it would be like me saying, I could beat up Mike Tyson. I could beat up Muhammad Ali, right? I could beat these guys up. Man, these guys ain't nothing. They're chumps. I could beat them up. Now, I say that because I'm not in their presence. And I think Mike Tyson, even in his 50s, could probably beat the living crap out of me, right? In other words, if I was to come face to face with Mike Tyson, I certainly would have a different tone. So when he says, if God was to come, I wouldn't serve you anyway. Would you? Really? You really think you would? Remember, we're talking about the fact of God himself. See, in other words, it's either to say that in the paradigm in which you live, because God gave you that paradigm, and you can curse him. So what is your complaint against God, since he's not smiting you? In other words, this man made this speech whenever he made the speech, and he didn't get struck by lightning. So you just disproved your own claims. God is not seeking to destroy you, because he hasn't. He's allowing you to live. He's allowing you to exist apart from him. Now, your problem is because of your choices, you're going to eternally exist apart from God. Now, you're saying, if God is true, that's fine. Let's go with that. If it's true, remember, it is you, the one that is making the choice to put the middle finger up to God. So why would God allow you to exist in his paradigm when you don't want to exist? By your own statements here, you would reject him even if you found that he is real. So why would he allow you to exist in his presence? Now let me say this, because he's going to give a list of people that he finds objectionable to think. And some of these people are atheists, so they died atheists. And his thing is that God is wrong because in the Christian faith, the Christian belief, those people are in hell. I say again, they're in hell because what? They rejected God. Just like if I were to come to his house and he says, well, before you can enter my house, you have to do such and such and such, like take off your shoes, right? Wear socks, right? You don't go in my kitchen and just help yourself to your living room. Don't go up in my bedroom and help yourself to my bedroom. And if I do those things, would he put me out of his house? And would he be right to put me out of his house? I would say yes, he would be right. Well, this is God's creation. God claims all of this. And you're choosing to reject that, so you're choosing not to live in God's creation. Now, another thing is, we don't know the hearts of the people he's getting ready to list. We don't know that he's going to say how good they are, but are they good according to God's standards?
Patsy Barker, who died as an atheist with a smile on her face, happy that she lived a good life raising 3 good boys.
According to whose standards? Well, yours, but did they meet God's standards? Since you're the one that's talking about God, so you're not talking about how good her atheist life was in a sense apart from God. And it certainly would be an assumption, would it? It certainly be an assumption is, you said she died with a smile on her face. Well, I can't challenge that because I wasn't present at her death.
That deity is torturing her in hell, her and Mark Twain and George Gershwin and Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Aaron Copland and Johannes Brahms and Prokofiev, Margaret Sanger.
It is interesting that he mentions Margaret Sanger. Was Margaret Sanger not a racist? And is that good? Now, we could get into some other aspects of Margaret Sanger and some of her activities, and would we say that's good? I won't get into it now, but interesting he mentions her.
Bertrand Russell, Carl Sagan, wonderful people who lived these lives. You're telling me that the God you love and admire has consigned us to eternal torture? Then I would say to that God, if you created hell, you go to hell. If you want to torture me forever, fine. You prove what a big macho man you are. You do not have my respect. Of course, he doesn't.
No, I don't think he needs your respect. And let me just say this. When you say, yeah, again, your insults against God is one thing. But remember this, that if God proves to be the creator of heaven and earth, if he proves that, then you're rejecting him. And you're rejecting him without caring that he is the creator of the earth, according to you. In other words, would you say that anyone who has committed crimes should be banished from society? We can just go on and list Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, Charles Manson. We can go on and on and on. Do these men deserve, despite their actions, do they deserve to live in society? In other words, as a law, we put them out of society. Why? Because they are evil men and they would continue to do evil. Of course, the list can go on and on and on. Hitler, for example, right? Hitler, despite if he was a Christian, he still was an evil man. Would you say he deserves to live in and among society?
Exist. This is all hypothetical.
To UNICEF, About 29,000 children under the age of 5 die each day, mainly from preventable causes. That's 21 dead children every minute, 10.6 million a year. That's the equivalent of a Holocaust every year. More than 70% of these 10.6 million children deaths every year are attributable to 6 causes: diarrhea, malaria, neonatal infection, pneumonia, preterm delivery, or lack of oxygen at birth. Science's response is, well, give them those things.
What is the science response again? I might have missed that, but what exactly is the science response? And then, since you will say God doesn't exist, then why do these horrid conditions exist, and why aren't you and other atheists doing something about them? It's a rhetorical question.
Religion's response is, those are part of God's plan.
Well, let me say, while that's an accurate statement, that there are Christians who will say this is God's plan, it is not a biblical plan. It is not. It's not a biblical response. But I think let's not. Let me not fall on this hill, because yes, there are many Christians who believe that what is going on in the earth is God's plan, that God ordained these things. I would disagree with that.
Really? What kind of plan is that? What kind of God, who is all-powerful and all good, would not stop that? Now, I'm not talking about homicides, gang warfare, civil wars, and strife in Syria. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about innocent children who have no free will. They're not freely choosing to die from horrible diseases and cancer. Why would God allow that to happen?
Well, my point is, he doesn't exist to you. So why do you allow it to happen? Why does your community allow it to happen?
An all-powerful, all-good God? A less than powerful or not so good God? Or no God at all? The problem with explaining evil for religious people, for theists, is what I call the irrefutable God problem. When good things happen, who gets the credit? God did it. He works in wonderful ways. He's answered my prayers. He made a miracle. When bad things happen, who gets the blame? Not God. Or, he works in mysterious ways, don't you know?
Now, let me say this, that either way, he's still God. So let's say if God was doing these things, he still would be God. Now, the fact that you may not know why he allows it, because that was, I want to say, a valid question. The problem is, you're not sticking around for the answer. You're not really looking for the answer. So in other words, why does God allow children to suffer? Well, you don't know the answer to it. And let's be honest, you don't care for his answer. You don't care for the answer because you do not believe he exists. So why answer the question in that respect, since you believe he doesn't exist? Now that's why I say people they're not trying to destroy God. They just want to destroy God in us.
What does that even mean? So no matter what happens, the God hypothesis is confirmed. What would disconfirm the God hypothesis?
So right there, that's the point. That's why all these you see atheists, the deconstructing and their arguments that they spend so much time on a God they do not believe exists. In other words, they want to destroy it in people.
Good things happen, so God is. Bad things happen, so God is. What would have to happen to refute this causal explanation of evil? In the Christian worldview, nothing can refute it.
Now you notice he's not refuting evil itself. he is refuting or he is accusing God, the God he doesn't believe in. He's accusing God of being evil, of allowing evil. In other words, his ire is directed towards God, not evil itself, because he's not doing anything about evil.
It's irrefutable. It's a simple assertion. It's true by asserting, I hereby say it's true. And that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence.
Christians have a pessimistic view of human nature. You think human beings are sick and need a doctor to be fixed up. You think there's something wrong with us and we need to be saved. You think that if we would submit to the doctor, then he would heal us. But we atheists and agnostics.
So yeah, we believe that. Now let me I'm going to say something, and I don't believe that he's refuting exactly what needs to be refuted. So you start with the idea that man is hopelessly lost in sin. He's a sinner. So man is lost in sin. That came from Adam. And my thing is, you cannot refute that. That man, you look at why there's evil in the world, because man is a sinner. Okay?
Don't view ourselves as sick. We don't view ourselves as sinners. We don't feel a conviction of wrong. We make mistakes. We don't buy into this supernatural, mythological lie that you people are promoting, that there's something actually spiritually wrong with humanity.
And I'm going to challenge the atheists by saying, how have they disproven that? Look at the world around you. I would further go on to say, even with atheists themselves, that with the nature of sin, okay, that you will sin because you are a sinner, and especially because you reject God, and you reject God's salvation, and you reject God's remedy for sin, that one, you as a sinner sin against your own standards, thus proving you are a sinner and proving God's claims. You are a sinner. So that's the first thing. Secondly, yeah, if you live in certain conditions, a paradigm, then yeah, you know what? You're not going to be as bad. But that's not God's standard. God's standard is sin from that perspective. And the idea is that, as I said earlier, if you were faced with conditions, if you remove the conditions of law, how bad of a sinner would you prove yourself to be?
Suppose you were convicted of a horrible crime. You were in prison. And then you learned that you were being released. Wow, you'd feel free. Wow, I'm being saved. This is wonderful. And I would feel great too. But what would make you feel better? Knowing that you had been released because of the good graces of the governor who decided to bestow mercy upon you and pardon you and let you free, which would be pretty neat if that happened. Or knowing that the reason you were being released was because you were found to be innocent of the crime in the first place. What would give you more dignity? What would make you feel better for the world to know, hey, I didn't even do that crime? That's how we atheists and agnostics are. We don't buy into this ancient primitive book of contradictory and unhistorical and unscientific words. These are just words on a page. This book was written by human beings. Human beings make mistakes.
Now, what is interesting is he only kind of cherry picks the scenario of a person being falsely accused and then falsely imprisoned in jail. Black people know about that too well, right? But what about those who are deserving to be in jail? Notice he didn't talk about the vast majority of people who are in jail is because they actually commit crimes. Now, at the same time, he's not talking about people who have committed crimes but they're not in jail. They don't go through the justice system because people outside, those who should be administering the laws, they themselves are criminals. They just never been tried. So, for example, when we think about people who get away with committing crimes all the time, they never ever enter the justice system. They never are convicted, but they too are criminals. So when you say, I'm a good man, well, you are a good man according to whose standards? You see, that there are plenty of parents who would never convict their unbelievably horrible criminal children, but because they're parents, they won't convict them. Now, is that right? If you're using the justice system. So whose standard are you going to measure yourself by in terms of goodness? Your own, right? Well, your own is subjective to you. But God's standard is much higher.
Were they exempt? Were they superhumans or something? Did they never misinterpret? Did they never move? Why are you conferring some supernatural authority to these human beings that, and they're in all religions as well? If you look at the Bible with not a bias of faith and loyalty, you can see very easily that this is not a reliable book to base our life on. But most of your arguments are based on quoting the scripture as if it was some kind of a magic talisman.
So I would wonder, on what basis then do you base life on? How do you base life? Throw away the Bible. God doesn't exist. The parameter of righteousness doesn't exist. So now, how would you then establish righteousness? How would you do that? Because you live in a paradigm where Christianity has affected you. So in America, Britain, a lot of laws were already based upon what God had interjected into the world. Now I know people would refute that and argue that, and I would say prove it wrong. But we don't have to go down that path. Let's just say again, if you're going to throw away the Bible, then how would you establish that stealing is wrong or murder is wrong? Why would it be wrong? If I'm bigger and badder than you, why can't I kill you? If I am bigger and badder than you, why can't I steal the watch that is on your hand? Why can't I take the tie? Why would that be wrong for me to just take it?
Quote the Bible. That will make everything important. Well, it doesn't. If you don't buy into that myth in the first place, if you don't see yourself as sick, if you don't see yourself as needing a Savior, if you rise above that toddler mentality of putting yourself down, of denigrating your rationality, denigrating your whatever urges you have to sin within you, and we all have them, but
Did he just admit to having urges to sin? But that's a biblical principle, is it not? When you say that you have urges to sin, well, what urges are they? And then how do you measure them to be able to say certain urges are, by the way, I agree with you, but what urges would you say that are acceptable and what urges that are not acceptable? Interesting here.
Self-neutrally as a natural creature in the natural environment, doing the best we can to truly figure out how to be moral human beings with reason and compassion, then you could be a better person. I'm not saying you're a bad person, but get rid of the baggage.
Now he's telling us to get rid of the baggage, meaning the Bible, but tell me where your method has worked. If we get rid of the Bible, then tell me where people have been better people. Tell me how marriages have been better. Tell me how everything has been better in the world from an atheist point of view.
Get the monkey off your back. Most Christians are afraid that people are going to start thinking for themselves. The Bible says,
no, we're not. Absolutely, we're not. We're not afraid of that. We may be a lot of other things, but that's one thing we're not afraid of.
very clearly, Paul says, bring into captivity every thought unto the obedience of Christ.
Actually, you know what? I'll retract that, because I will say that there are some Christians, that there are Christian leaders, and we have had Christian leaders throughout time that have been afraid for people to think for themselves. And I'm going to say, to go a step further, to read the Bible for themselves. So I'll retract my last statement. All right. I'm not afraid to think for myself. I'm not afraid for anybody to think for myself. I'm not afraid for the atheist to challenge my faith, but that's subjective to me. I acknowledge that.
Captivity is not freedom. And in Proverbs, lean not on your own understanding. Most Christians are afraid that people will think for themselves. Most atheists are afraid that they won't.
Or won't think like you. But again, I'm going to challenge, tell me where the atheism has worked in a atheistic paradigm.
Type to suggest that people of faith are not good people. Of course, that's ridiculous. And just like it's a stereotype to say people of no faith are not good people, which unfortunately in certain parts of the world is a death sentence because of religion.
Well, I would not say that it is because of religion only. It's certainly true for religion. But I'm going to say too that given the power, atheists would do the same thing. See, in closing, let me just say this. There are a lot of people, these atheists will say they're not trying to destroy God because they don't believe God exists. So all you just see in a lot of the arguments that atheists put forth is really trying to destroy the ideology of God. They're trying to destroy God in you. And then I would counteract by saying that you offer nothing. You don't really offer anything, because I'm going to say that if we did throw away the Bible, if everybody threw away the Bible, you wouldn't throw away sin. And how would you overcome sin? That is one of your biggest denials. How would you overcome sin? All right, guys, that's my perspective. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. Till next time, I'll see you in the next video. All right.